Good evening, everybody. Welcome back for another edition of Reasonable Doubt, brought to you by the Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association. I'm your host, Jimmy Ardwan, and he's back, ladies and gentlemen. He is back. Julio Vela, there you are, my friend. How was soccer last week?
Awesome.
I know nothing about this sport.
You know, I didn't...
I played it in first grade, and I quit after that.
I've actually never played soccer my entire life. However, I've grown to appreciate the huge fan base in Houston and the connection that the soccer fans have across the globe.
Well, I'm glad you were able to connect with everybody last week at NRG, but I'm more glad that you're back.
Me too. Back better than ever.
It's good to have you back.
You know, today is my birthday.
What?
July 27th. 34 years old.
Whoa. Okay, hold on. It can't be, because Facebook did not tell me it was your birthday.
It didn't?
No.
I tried sending messages to all my friends, and I got 0 happy birthdays on my Facebook.
Well,
very sad.
Happy birthday.
Well, thank you.
We shall celebrate accordingly.
I'm very excited.
I mean, had social media actually worked and informed me of this, I would have told you earlier.
Oh, I know.
We would have prepared some hijinks.
I know.
It was actually your birthday.
I know everybody is celebrating in spirit and in heart.
Well, all right. We're gonna talk about that, but we've got a great show tonight, ladies and gentlemen. We have with us tonight the candidate for U.S. Congress in the 21st District in Texas, Chris Perri. Thanks for joining us, my friend.
Absolutely, I'm happy to be here.
You are the first, as I was telling you before you came on the show, you are the first congressional candidate we've had on this show. So we're moving up in the world.
Oh yeah.
We've had some judicial candidates, and we've had some other candidates on, but you are the first one who's actually running for Congress to join us. So we thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you for having me here. I mean, it's high time for criminal defense lawyers to get in this field.
I don't know about, let's not go too far. We'll let you have that. But Chris is going to be with us for the next hour, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to talk a lot about, obviously, his run for Congress. He is a practicing criminal defense attorney right now, so obviously he has some things to say about criminal justice reform, bail reform. There was a new bail proposal put forth federally by a couple of congressman and a congresswoman. So we're going to talk about that and a lot more things. You can call in. We'll open up the phones probably around 8:30. 713-807-1794 is the number. I've also got Twitter up right here, so you can send us your questions and comments for Chris Perri. No relationship to the governor, the former governor, so don't worry about that. It's Perri with an I, not with a Y. But first off, Chris, I want to ask you, why the hell do you want to do this? And I don't mean that sarcastically. Why do you want to get into this? I mean, Washington is such a mess right now. What makes you want to jump into that?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like after the election in 2016, what was going on in terms of the Trump administration coming in, hiring Jeff Sessions, who I feel like is probably the most horrible choice to be Attorney General, just made it so that it's hard to do our jobs as defense attorneys. And we have an ethic to zealously represent our clients, and I felt like that ethic and that fight we do for our clients could be something that the constituents of my district need to protect their rights. And I just got tired of the infringements, the travel ban, and somebody has to go up there and fight to protect citizens' rights. And you don't see a whole lot of defense attorneys going into politics.
No, you don't.
And I think it's because before now, we didn't have this crisis of our rights just being infringed on. And as I think y'all know, being defense attorneys, what we do every day is fighting for people, and people need to be fought for.
Well, I think the presumption amongst most defense lawyers is I could never get past people looking into my background. I mean, look, even what happened this year with, or last year, I should say, because it's 2016, when they looked at Hillary Clinton, who had represented I think a death row inmate. You know, it's come up before where people have represented child molesters or other people accused of heinous crimes. And all of us who are defense attorneys have at one time or another represented somebody who has been convicted of some of the most heinous acts that you could possibly think of in society. And so not a lot of, amazingly to me, and this is what I guess, you know, begs the question that I asked you, is that most lawyers, despite all of our ego, despite all of our bravado, we don't want to put that stuff out there and be criticized for it.
I welcome it. I think that I want people to ask me that question, because what I'm doing as a defense attorney is I'm defending the Constitution. And if we didn't have us defending the Constitution, I mean, freedom would go away. So I always put it this way to people when they ask a question like that is like, do you want to lock somebody up for the rest of their life unless you knew that their rights were zealously defended at a trial? Unless you knew that they got every single possible defense? You can't have confidence that a conviction was real and valid and based on facts unless a defense attorney did everything they could to protect that client. And even then, we still have wrongful convictions. So the way I see it is bring it on if people want to challenge me on that. And then I would say, do you want government infringing on your rights? Do you want somebody to protect you from what's going on right now? And I think that we have enough infringements on those rights by the current administration that you need people to come up there and protect and say, I'm going to protect everybody. If you're a criminal defense attorney, it shows through your history that you're willing to walk the walk.
Well, let me ask you about that, because you're running as a Democrat. Okay, you're one of the Democrats who's trying to do the flip the district kind of thing. I mean, you're running in Lamar Smith's district, the 21st district. But you say that about government infringements. But look, frankly, the government infringements got just as bad, if not worse, under the Obama administration. So, I mean, that's the Democratic Party that allowed some of this great expansion of surveillance and other infringements upon rights. So how do you reconcile with that in your own mind with running as a Democrat?
Exactly. I mean, I don't think that any party is perfect, and I definitely don't think the Democratic Party is perfect. And I think that if you had more criminal defense lawyers, more people that care about the Constitution in the government, you would have more carefully tailored policies when there are some of those surveillance type of activities. I also really believe that something that's been going on in the last 10 years, last 20 years, is there's been a lack of fighting the major banks, an allowance of mega mergers going on. And Democrats have been allowing that to happen. They've been allowing an economic concentration to go on. So yeah, I'm not an establishment candidate, obviously, of a criminal. The Democrats probably wouldn't have recruited a criminal defense attorney. I consider myself that wants to come out from the outside and protect people's rights. And my core values abide by what the Democratic Party's core values are, but I kind of think it stops there. I want to fight corruption wherever it's coming from, and I want to protect the Constitution for everyone. And I think that that's been getting, or actually no, that's been getting a lot of it's been resonating in District 21 when I talk to people about that, because I want to break the partisan divide and say I'm here for you. Regardless of whether you vote for me or not, I'm going to do the best policies for all of the constituents in my district, which is District 21 in Texas.
What do you think is the biggest roadmap that you're facing and some of your colleagues on getting elected, on flipping these counties, or these districts, pardon me? What do you think is the biggest roadblock or obstacle that's challenging you?
Yeah, I think that the partisan divide that's going on in this country is a big challenge. Being able to unify the parties. And that's why when I go out to the Hill Country, which is historically a Republican district, mostly votes straight Republican tickets, I don't usually lead with, I'm a Democrat and I want to tell you why to vote for me. I go out there and I say, what are your concerns? What keeps you up at night? And what I found is that there is a lot of common ground. I was talking to somebody the other day who really believed in veterans issues, which I deeply care about myself, with my father being a naval veteran, who said that he wanted term limits. And that was great common ground because the guy I'm going against, Lamar Smith, has been in office for 30 years. So if you want term limits, well, the person you're going to go against is Lamar Smith. And I was talking to somebody else the other day who was clearly a Republican. But we started talking, he was a builder though, and we started talking about solar jobs and how I want to increase the solar infrastructure in District 21. And District 21 has more solar jobs than anywhere else in Texas, and yet we only have 0.3% of our energy being done by solar. And I'm going to help make those incentives so small businesses can get in the field. And after talking about that, he was like, I'm going to vote for you instead of Lamar Smith because you're actually going to do something that helps my life, helps my job.
Are you seeing that? Are you flipping Republicans to Democrats one by one up in your district?
I want to see it as we're not necessarily flipping them from Republican to Democrat. We're convincing them that, and showing them that this progressive message is actually better for them than what Lamar Smith is hawking. So unity is really what I'm after. And I feel like when you start talking to people about, for example, why universal health care is actually a conservative policy, because by getting the for-profit mechanism out of healthcare, you actually save money because so much money is just wasted on profits and administrative costs there. If you message it correctly, and I'm able to do that messaging because I have a master's degree in economics as well and have some credibility when I talk about the economics of it, then I find that people are like, oh, you actually have you not only have this progressive platform, but you have a way to pay for it. And then that starts to bridge some of the historical divide you would have between conservatives and liberals.
It's more enlightenment than.
Exactly, and that's why you have to ask open-ended questions. You have to find out what people care about. You don't just dictate to them, oh, you voted for Trump, you made a mistake. You leave that alone. Talk about what issues do you care about. And I find that more often than not, there's way more common ground with me than Lamar Smith, who won't even come out to his district, by the way. And that, even if somebody disagrees with me on a lot of issues, just the fact that I show my face and am willing to engage with people, that goes a long way, because we've called Lamar Smith to town halls there, and he constantly refuses to interact with his constituents unless it's a closed-door meeting where people are paying $10,000 in a fundraiser, and it's all Republicans. He just won't talk to the people that he's representing.
What do you think is the biggest, I mean, first of all, how many people are vying for the Democratic nomination in that district?
In that district right now, there's 6, which I really believe tells you there's some wisdom of crowds going on there, because there wouldn't be 6 people putting in this significant time investment unless they really felt that that seat, that Lamar Smith Republican seat, is extremely fragile, his hold on it right now.
Yeah, what do you think your biggest obstacle is in terms of getting the nomination? Is it fundraising? Is it that you have kind of a non-traditional Democratic platform? What do you think is your biggest obstacle in getting the nomination?
I think the biggest obstacle might be partly fundraising, although we've done really well at that. We were number 2 in terms of cash on hand with the most recent FEC report coming out, and that was despite only having 2 months. We launched on May 1st rather than April 1st.
Okay.
So I feel like the fundraising actually going really well. We're seeing a lot of people are realizing that, hey, if you want to get change, we can't sit on our butts anymore. We can't let the corporations be the ones that fund the candidates. We have to actually be the ones that contribute $10, $20 to these candidates. But I think maybe one of the biggest obstacles would be a certain level of establishment partisanship. And let me just explain what I mean by that. It's a lot of my opponents will say to people, I want you to pledge your support to me, and kind of try to impede maybe the democratic process. I think people should have an open mind right now.
Is this the whole Trump loyalty thing?
Yeah, there is.
That everybody wants you to be loyal to them?
Exactly.
And pledge, bend the knee, as they would say in Game of Thrones?
I know. I've had people come up to me and be like, I really love your message, but I pledge my support to this other candidate. And what I really want to say is like, if you thought that what happened to Bernie Sanders was bad, then and you were complaining that people like already decided Hillary Clinton was the candidate without giving Bernie a chance, then democracy demands that you listen to these candidates. You don't have to make a choice right now. So I really feel like my biggest obstacle is just having people keep an open mind, and if they do, I think they'll see that I'm not only a candidate that represents progressive values, but I also have a message that can unify and actually win against Lamar Smith.
What do you think? So, for instance, I'll just use myself as an example. I don't feel like I fit into either party, okay? And I think there's a lot of people that feel that way. I think right now you've got a huge polarization where you've got probably 20% that are hardcore Republicans, 20% that are hardcore Democrats, and they're, entracted in, and then you've got this 60% in the middle that kind of float in between. I think some of them, they probably have a lot of Republican values, but I think in this last election you saw certain districts, and I think your district might be one of them, several other Republican districts that actually went for Hillary Clinton because they could not see themselves voting for Donald Trump. And so, I'm one of those that for a while now has felt like I haven't fit into either party. So how do you address somebody like me?
Yeah, I would first of all ask you about what your most important issue is.
Well, I mean, my most important issue, honestly, is to rein in government spending.
All right. then I would argue
that's the biggest one for me, honestly, because I just see so much government waste.
Right.
I see it on every level, and it's not just private prisons. I mean, government waste encompasses so much stuff, and you can talk about it in terms of criminal justice reform or immigration policy, But the overarching thing that I see is there's just so much waste in the system. The system itself is inefficient. And I don't know, because the government has gotten so big, frankly, as a result of both parties, because this two-party system has become, in my opinion, just one big monster, because I view them as all wanting the same thing, the expansion of government. Because if they contract government, guess what? Those two parties lose power. And they don't want to lose that, in my opinion. And so inherently, we have now built in a bunch of waste into the system, where people are playing favorites or cutting deals, piggybacking some pet project onto another, to, you know, where the bipartisanship now is, okay, well, we'll vote for your deal, you vote for our deal. And inherent in all that is just this enormous amount of waste.
Yeah, so it sounds like waste and corruption are two big issues to you. So that's why I asked you that question, because this is how I would deal with talking to somebody that is independent. I think that one of the big problems with government waste is that there's so much private contracting, and then it makes it so that there's no oversight over those private contractors. Even though the actual employee that's hired by the private contractor doing a federal job is paid about the same as the federal employee, the private contracting company gets 4 times that amount. So a lot of the waste is just going to line these private companies that are basically in cahoots with many of these politicians. It's not a fair private contracting process. I've had friends that had really great small business ideas try to get in on it, and they never can get those contracts because there's a revolving door, there's money under the table possibly. So what I would argue is we have to get the economic concentration in Washington away, and that's been built up by this monopoly power. It's causing these politicians to be in bed with certain companies, and these monopoly type companies basically dictate to the politicians which private contractors to hire. So I would go after that. That's how I'd go after the waste.
Well, one of the prime examples to me is, since this is a criminal justice show, is of course private prisons.
Yeah.
The private prison industry. I mean, they have shown that there are senators and congressmen who own stock or sit on the board of these very same private prison companies that they are doling out contracts to, that they are voting on amendments or expansions of the sentencing guidelines to, which they are passing new criminal laws, either under the United States Code or under the CFRs or whatever obscure regulation. I don't know if you've seen the Twitter handle Crime a Day. It's great. I mean, they literally post one crime a day from the federal system, either the U.S. Code or the CFRs or whatever. And they posted the other day that they have been, I think, in existence for 2 or 3 years, and they still haven't even gotten, like, you know, a third of the way through of all the possible crimes within the federal system. And so, I mean, right there is the prime example of corruption, of, you know, just this inherent conflict of interest in that you're voting on laws to put more people in prison with mandatory minimums, with all this other stuff, and you're feeding the monster that you sit on the board of or you own stock in.
Yeah, Jimmy, you hit the nail right on the head there, and that's actually one of the things that lit the fire under me. I was thinking about getting in the race, and when Jeff Sessions rolls back those private prison reforms that Obama had made.
Yeah, but hold on just a second there. He didn't make that until he was one step out of office, and so I got to call BS on that, because a lot of people will point that, and a lot of people will criticize Sessions and Trump for rolling that back. But Obama could have done that the first day he walked in, okay? He could have come in, he had Holder, he had a Democratic Congress, and they didn't do crap on that, okay? So I call BS on that, because he could have done that day one. He could have done an executive order on day one, and we could have been without private prisons for the last 8 years and made it a lot tougher for Sessions and Trump to put that back in.
Right. Well, okay, I'll agree. Obama could have done more. He did roll back the use of the private prisons a lot.
But not until the end.
Not until the end. That is very true. And I do think we've gone backward from there. But the point I wanted to really get at was a lot of these politicians should be in jail. So you see the stocks of the GEO Corporation, the stocks of Correction Corporations of America go up right when Trump goes into office. And then you see $250,000 apiece go into his inaugural campaign. And then what happens a couple weeks later? The rollback of what Obama did too late, as you're saying, but then they roll that back, and then he issues that horrible memorandum saying that we have to now prosecutors don't have discretion with respect to mandatory minimums. So to me, that would, I mean, in the federal law, a lot of that would be insider trading if they didn't have the immunities that they do in government. And the other disgusting thing that I saw that just makes me want to send people to jail too, since we're on a criminal justice show, is that representative out in West Texas, Mike Conaway, while he was voting for Trump Care, invested in United Healthcare stock. Senator John Inhofe up in Oklahoma invested in United Healthcare stock while he was voting on it there. That to me, that is the type of insider trading that they put people in prison for in the federal courts. And I want to go. That's why I want to go up there. I want to go up there and put a stop to that type of activity. I think it should be a lot easier to prove quid pro quo corruption. I mean, I was looking at the McDonnell effect and the guy that got off by the appeals court the other day, and
Virginia.
it's because, yeah, just acting under color of office isn't enough to prove corruption anymore. You have to actually say that you tie a specific policy you did in exchange for money in order to prove that. It should be a lot easier to prove these types of corruption cases. We have clients going to jail on a much lower standard of proof than it takes to prove a politician.
Well, but isn't that always the criticism? I mean, look what happened to the man of no relation to you, Rick Perri, with how he got his case thrown out. I mean, the courts of appeals, essentially, the Court of Appeals and the Court of Criminal Appeals, you know, not just in my mind, but in a lot of people's mind, really expanded the use of First Amendment that they probably would not have done for a regular, ordinary Joe.
I do a ton of appellate work, so that hits very close to home to me. I have never seen the Court of Criminal Appeals find legally insufficient evidence, except in the Tom DeLay case, rendering complete verdict of acquittal for one of their Republican cohorts. I thought they felt like, oh, this is politics. We could have been there too. And then the way they just allowed a pretrial writ to go on Rick Perry's case when they usually say they're not cognizable to litigate those types of pretrial issues. They made the Rick Perry exception, and bailed him out of trouble. Probably the most harshest high criminal court in any state that never lets anybody out. I mean, 15,000 writs I saw were filed in the last 3 years, and they only granted 2. So, and they're letting Tom DeLay and Rick Perry off completely.
Yeah. I haven't seen a whole lot of other cases like that.
We never get the benefit of the doubt. Even sometimes when I get writs agreed to, they'll somehow find a way to deny it up there. But they bent over backwards to help DeLay and Perry out.
What are you going to do up there? I mean, what's your plan then? Are you just going to call out all these people, or do you have, I mean, what's your plan when you get up there?
Yeah, I think that, first of all, you have to start with strong leadership. So I'm going to start drafting bills that accord with what I'm saying. I'm going to start giving more power to the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, to use the antitrust laws. Because I think the primary evil that's going on in our country right now is the economic concentration in the hands of the very few. And that's having a spillover effect where it's causing them to control our politicians, because the corporations now have a monopoly of the politicians because they're the ones giving them all that money. So I think if we start actually using antitrust laws in a way that divides up these corporations that have been on all the mega mergers. I mean, you have our airlines are entirely monopolies. You have the cable companies are entirely monopolies. Where we get our food in Monsanto is. So there's just no more control of the people of what's going on. And since those people control the politicians basically just do whatever the bidding is. Since 2008, $10 trillion worth of mergers have happened in our government, just making the economic concentration even smaller and smaller and smaller at the very top. So I think we have to go there first. We have to get the government back to the people before we can start making real positive change happen. And it starts with busting it up.
You know, I misspoke earlier because they were not two Congress members. It was actually senators that proposed the bail reform bill. It was Kamala Harris and Rand Paul. I look at that and I say to myself, okay, here's a bipartisan bill coming from the Senate. And it looks good, and everybody wants to talk criminal justice reform. But going back to Holder and Obama, there was a lot of talk and not a lot of action. I mean, you've got criminal justice reform on your priority list.
I do.
What? And look, I mean, obviously, I feel like this is a Johnny-come-lately bill because we've had a bunch of bail reform lawsuits. So, okay, hey, here we come. We're going to make a a national bail reform bill. It's like, well, wait a second. What about all the lawsuits and everything? You kind of hop on that train a little late. So, what can actually be done and accomplished? We hear all this stuff, but just starting on a basic level, what kind of criminal justice reform are you hearing out there that you think can actually get bipartisan support to actually just start something?
I think that there's a lot of support out there to start addressing the mass incarceration issue. And I do think that you have to kind of take a zoom out a little on the mass incarceration issue and first guess, why is there mass incarceration? Why are people of color so disproportionately in prison? I think a lot of it has to do with systemic racism. I think a lot of it has to do with socioeconomic issues of what lawyer you can afford. But I do think that there's front-end ways you can help it and back-end ways in the system. So front-end, I do think bail reform is a good policy because as we know as criminal defense attorneys, one of the biggest indicators of the success of your case is whether your client is out of jail.
Sure.
So if right now, it's more about money. If you have money, you can get out of jail. If you don't have money, you probably stay in jail. And so bail reform would help with that. I also think at a front-end policy is transparency with the police officers. Police officers need to have body cams. They need to be able to know what's going on with them. Back-end stuff, I've always, and this is not something that I could probably really do in Congress, but it's something that I've really always questioned in our criminal justice system is we don't question the jury's verdict at all. We don't question whether they followed the law. There's no transparency with juries. I had an appeal case with clear juror misconduct. I won a motion for new trial on a separate issue, but on the juror misconduct, there was a refusal to go behind the scenes and question it, even though there was clear racism going on in the jury room. And I think that if we're so concerned about what's going on the front end, why do we just sit back and say, oh, if a jury returned that verdict, it must be fact? Well, and it's a finality over accuracy there, and then you can't get these wrongful convictions overturned.
I'm glad you hit on that because that has been a pet peeve of mine forever. But before I say that, I want to say we're going to open up the phone lines here in a couple minutes. So if you got questions and comments, number 713-807-1794. Get in our conversation here with Chris Perri, the congressional candidate in the 21st District up in the Austin area. We also have Twitter up. You can send us your questions and comments there at HCCLA TV. So that has been one of my biggest pet peeves is reviewing a jury's verdict, okay? And I don't know how you solve this. And maybe you can enlighten me on how this can get done in Congress or otherwise. But the problem I see is this. On the criminal side, we get a jury verdict. We get all this stuff, and 99.9% of the time, what does the Court of Appeals say? They say, yeah, well, but the jury had this to look at, and we don't want to invade the province of the jury, okay? On just about every single criminal case, they will outline a list of errors, and they will say, we're not going to invade the province of the jury. Flip over to the civil side, where 12 people or 6 people or 8 people or whoever say, you know what, Exxon or Memorial Hermann or insert whatever doctor here, you owe the plaintiff $10 million or $20 million or $50 million. Insert whatever verdict you want. Court of Appeal routinely comes back and says, the jury got it wrong and that verdict must be reduced. Because we all know we can't trust juries to get it right on the civil side, but we can trust them to get it right every single time on the criminal side. How the hell do you fix that?
I think we need to rewrite the federal rules of evidence. Allow us to, on a criminal level, allow us to get behind that jury verdict. Sometimes if you hear evidence that something went wrong, that jury was bullied, that they were told to decide a case not on the judge's instructions, why can't we look behind it? And why is there a rule of evidence that prohibits it? And here's the reason is, on a criminal level, they want finality over accuracy. We see that with the harmless error rule. How can they really know whether an error is harmless? They don't have a crystal ball, but they enact that crystal ball after that verdict goes in because it's a sham that it's really beyond a reasonable doubt proof. That's just something, it's a fiction we create so we can all go to bed at night and sleep tight and think that the justice system works. But if you're not willing to investigate how jurors arrive at their decision, what if they do it by lot? What if they, I saw a case in Dallas where certain jurors went out of the room and one of the foremen prayed with somebody to come up with what God said would be the accurate solution. Luckily, the DA's office there agreed that that was just horrible, gave the new trial, even though if they wasn't a reasonable DA's office, it would have gone on appeal, and they would have said you can't consider that evidence, and somebody would have been in prison for 25 years.
Yeah.
So I think we really need to look and say, if we're at the front end, so into transparency, at the back end, we need to be into transparency too.
Yeah, I just don't know. I mean, that's a good point you make about, I don't think a lot of people understand that Congress does have the power to amend the federal rules of evidence. They have the power to amend, to take away, strike, statutes, whatever. I don't even know. I wish I would have looked it up. Maybe I can look it up. I can Google it. Maybe, I could do some hack research here on the air. But when was the last time the federal rules of evidence were even amended?
It's been a while. They've been the exact same since I became a lawyer.
I'm going to Google it.
Have you found a sense of common ground with some of the people that are colleagues of yours who may be running or in politics about criminal justice reform, and what are they?
Yeah, most people think that we send way too many people to prison. And with the I think the opioid epidemic going on right now has really opened up a lot of people's eyes, that if you just put these people in prison for drug use, they come out with no skills to help with their treatment. They come out with no job skills either. So then you get released into a society that's not giving you benefits, that thinks you're a criminal, that labels you as that. And then how can you not just go right back to committing another crime? And I think that the people I've talked to are more seeing that rehabilitation should be the aim of our justice system. And they don't want to be paying tax dollars to put somebody in a prison when there's no societal benefit for it. So what I really love is like what Kentucky is doing, where they're setting up treatment programs in the actual cells, and it's almost like an inpatient treatment facility, and the people come out with a lot better results, and they're not addicted, and they come out with some job skills. And I think that if you could give ideas that I've posed on people that have gotten a lot of good feedback are time credits. Give some time credits in exchange for completing an educational program there. If it's a drug offense, completing a treatment program, completing maybe some vocational programs so that when you get out of prison, you have some real skills that you can contribute to the job market. And you're in prison less, so it's less tax dollars. And I couch that as a conservative policy because it's costing less and actually having a benefit on society by having people released and being able to actually contribute.
What's your stance on marijuana?
I want to legalize it. And I think at the federal level, what we can do is we need to remove it from Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act, because it's right up there with methamphetamine right now and heroin. And it's actually in a higher schedule than cocaine, which is just ridiculous considering the medicinal effects of it and how it has no addictive qualities that are similar at all to methamphetamine or heroin. And I think that this is another area where you could talk to conservatives about it being a states' rights issue. If you legalize it on the federal level, then you give the states a complete choice of whether to legalize or not. So Colorado doesn't have to live in fear of Jeff Sessions waking up one morning and sending the DEA to shut down all these great economic programs that have been developed there that are helping schools through taxes. And that's another thing we could do if we legalize it on the federal level. We could have it regulated through the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Bureau, call it the ATFM, add a little marijuana in there, and then have them collect the tax. And there could be, the studies I've looked at say there's, on a state, local, and federal level, there's a $50 billion industry depending on how high you tax marijuana. And what could that go to? That could go to schools, education, help with some free college, some career-ready schools to help our economy. And it's also a humanitarian issue. Medicinal marijuana is great medicine for people, and it has a better effect than opioids. And it would also save Medicaid $1 billion a year if medicinal marijuana was available everywhere, as opposed to having to substitute it for some type of opioid that the pharmaceutical companies are hawking. Who opposes this? Big Pharma. So again, we get back to the central theme of these monopolies are controlling our governmental policies. And then lastly, with marijuana, there's the industrial hemp industry to think about, which is a whole new economic area that you can develop infrastructure for, create jobs, and also environmentally substitute it for non-organic cotton, plastics, and cement. It's all better for the environment than that. So there's just huge, huge benefits to legalizing marijuana at the federal level. And of course, reducing the number of prison sentences, just ridiculous prison sentences that go to people that are caught with large amounts of marijuana that are shipping it across the country when they go to federal court. There's often mandatory minimums. When a U.S. attorney takes up a marijuana case, it's usually a large amount of marijuana, and then now they're going to have to go after the mandatory minimum under the Jeff Sessions rule.
Yeah, they are. So interesting, my hack research here on the fly, there actually have been some minor, and I do say minor, amendments to the federal rules of evidence, but it does not look like they have had really any kind of substantive amendments since 1975.
Wow.
But I would have to read a little closer in order to actually ascertain that, but I'm just kind of doing a little quick research. You're talking about the mandatory minimums and everything, but there is one other thing that is out there that I want to ask you about on the federal side of things, and that is the lack of ability to get a federal record expunged. And if you are caught in the federal criminal system, unlike the state system, on the state side, if you get a case dismissed or if you complete a deferred adjudication successfully and get it dismissed, you have the option potentially of getting an expunction in certain situations or a petition for non-disclosure in certain situations. That option is not available to you in the federal system. So if your case gets dismissed in the federal system and somebody wants to go on the PACER system, which is the electronic evidence, electronic docket sheet for federal courts, they could still find your charge, they could still find your indictment, they could still find everything to do with your case that wasn't sealed. Likewise, if you were acquitted, the case would still be out there, and somebody doing a public record search could see you were charged with possession with intent to distribute, or bank fraud, or healthcare fraud, or whatever they decided to charge you with. Have you ever thought about putting up a bill to rectify that situation?
I absolutely have, and I'm the person to do it because I'm considered one of the foremost experts on Texas expunction law and non-disclosure law here in Texas. I've actually fought to expand expunction rights in Texas in the unfortunately losing cases. I'll blame the courts on it, the MM case and the GBE case, where they basically said even if you get a case dismissed, if you had another arrest arising out of the same incident or another charge arising out of the same incident, even if it was completely unrelated, for example, if you got a speeding ticket at the same time you were getting arrested on an assault warrant, if you take a conviction for that speeding ticket, you can't expunge that. It's just crazy, crazy law. But, so what I've done is I'm the supervising attorney at UT Law for this a program called the UT Law Expunction Project, and we help indigent Central Texans clear wrongful arrests from their criminal backgrounds. And what that's done is that's really helped people that otherwise wouldn't be able to get jobs, that wouldn't be able to get apartments, get those jobs and apartments because those wrongful arrests are off there. And it's just awful that they don't have anything parallel to that in the federal system. So a wrongful arrest can happen in the federal system. It usually looks pretty ugly in the federal system because it's a felony. And somebody sees
and the
that
allegations are pretty bad too, usually.
And they see the word federal on your criminal back, and that just is scary to potential employers. And you have to get like a certificate of innocence, which I've looked into that, and it's basically impossible to get a certificate of innocence because if any one of the elements they charged was right, not if all of them were right, but just if they could have proved like that you were a person.
Identity?
Yeah, exactly. So then you can't get a certificate of innocence. So it's impossible to expunge those federal offenses. So it's like things are truly geared against you from the moment you're getting arrested. You're gonna have that mark on you the rest of your life, even if it was a wrongful arrest in the federal system. So I'm absolutely in favor of that. And I think it could get bipartisan support because you got to phrase it as wrongful and a way of getting these dismissed charges expunged. Because what do we say in criminal justice? Innocent until proven guilty. Well, how are you truly innocent in this day and age with the ability to research records like you can on Google? And everybody can find out anything they want about you in about 10 seconds if they have a public data access.
What about the sentencing guidelines? Federal sentencing guidelines, because the purpose behind them was to try and make standard sentences across the country and standardize sentencing so that people in say Arizona were not being sentenced differently from those in Texas or Florida or Alabama caught within the federal system. 12 years ago, the Supreme Court ruled that the sentencing guidelines were not mandatory any longer, that they were merely advisory on the courts. But we now have a situation where sentences are all over the place. Some judges use the guidelines, and some of the old school judges, that's all they do is they use the guidelines, and they just give a guideline sentence, and that's it. With few exceptions. They'll vary here and there. And some judges, they always vary. They always give a variance and do not give a guideline sentence. So why the hell do we need the sentencing guidelines anymore? If the Supreme Court says they're not mandatory, why can't Congress just strike them down?
I think they could, and they probably should, because it gives you a false sense of equality through the system. Because you're right, as a federal practitioner, there just isn't that. It depends on in Austin, there's 2 different judges, and they'll come up with completely different sentencing guidelines on the same case. And they, for the most part, do follow them, but it seems like there's such a range on them that you never know what you're going to get. And it seems like there maybe should be a little more, if you wanted to have more equality across the system, maybe give more discretion to the prosecutors to work out deals with defense attorneys so you actually know what you're getting into when you plead guilty. Too many times I have somebody in the federal court system with a marginal case that we might have gone to trial on, but the sentencing guidelines are set so you get punished so severely for not accepting responsibility that a lot of people that might have really legitimate arguments about their innocence are like, you know what, that's too much of a gamble. I'm just going to cut my losses, take this sentence, and then go hope the judge has some pity on me when they give me my -3 sentencing reduction.
Well, and there's so much manipulation of the guidelines. Because if a prosecutor really wants somebody to testify or cooperate against the other person, they might say, well, you know, the conspiracy says we got $20 million alleged in the conspiracy. $20 million alleged in conspiracy, but we'd be willing to agree that the loss amount on your guy, that he's only going to be held responsible for $1 million. Well, the difference between $1 million versus $20 million in terms of the sentencing guideline calculation, I mean, to me, that's sentencing guideline manipulation, okay? And you are basically still putting the power within the prosecutors to decide the sentence, not the court. And the court is the one who under 3553 has the power to sentence people, not the prosecutors. But by having this guideline structure in place, you've allowed the federal prosecutors to manipulate, and basically they're the ones dictating the sentences now, and have been for years. Because they get to decide, essentially, well, you know, we may or may not advocate for that factor. We can be your best friend or your worst enemy when it comes to that. And I get it, you know, I mean, look, that's the way the system is. And we all have to play that system right now. But it seems to me we need to get back to a system where the prosecutors aren't the ones that have all the power, that they're not the card dealers, that they're just as much players in the game as we are, and the person with the power is the person on the bench, that they're the ones who decide what the sentence is.
How do you handle people saying that you're soft on crime, all right? All these reforms, or you're not punishing people. How do you respond to that? I'm sure the other side is saying, I mean, you're preaching reforms in the justice system, which all seems like it's soft on crime. I'm playing devil's advocate here, and so how do you deal with that? What's your response to that?
My response would be that we have to go to what the goals of the system are. And on drug crimes, I think you need to shift the conversation to being, what is our goal with a drug crime? So is putting somebody in prison for 2 years versus 10, is that soft? Or is that just accomplish nothing? If your goal is rehabilitation, you're not being soft on crime if you figure out an effective way to rehabilitate that person. And I'm not soft. I mean, just because you're a criminal defense attorney doesn't mean you're soft on crime in terms of violent crimes, things that really do need people to become incapacitated in a prison system. Just because you're defending somebody doesn't mean that you can't go to Washington and be an objective person. I mean, I've seen prosecutors become defense attorneys become prosecutors. We all have a role in the criminal justice system to find truth and to seek truth. So I don't think that I'm soft on crime at all, is what I tell people. And I'd also say that I know more about the justice system than any of the other candidates, and I would be able to use it to go after the real crimes that are going on, the crimes that are going on in Washington, that are the corruption, the quid pro quo, the fact that there is just incipient corruption and favor dealings and people getting rich off of taxpayer money that are in political power, and I'm going to go after those types of people. So I'd argue that I have a very prosecutorial bent towards the politicians and the people that have been getting away with corrupt activities for such a long time. And I mean, I made a speech at the impeachment march on Trump about why there's a case against him. So I can show that I have a prosecutorial mind. I'm not one making excuses for Trump with his obstruction of justice. I've gone on a limb and said, I do think that there's a solid case, all the elements have been met, and he should be impeached. And if there's collusion found amongst his people with Russia, like for example, Michael Flynn, he needs to go to prison. So I'm going to take a stand that outside, I defend people when I'm defending people accused of crimes, but nobody's ever gone after these politicians, and I relish the ability to do that and to use my criminal justice knowledge to be able to build tight cases against them and use subpoena power.
Aren't you afraid? Be going up against politicians, big corporations. You think you got the guts for that?
I think you need a criminal defense attorney to do it. We have to go up against prosecutors, against judges that hate our guts all the time, against people that think that we're wasting their time when we're wanting to defend a constitutional right, when we're wanting not to take a plea bargain. We go up with scarce resources, outgunned all the time. That's the ethic of a criminal defense attorney, is winning. That's why it's so sweet for us to win. I've never understood, I mean, prosecutors go win, but I don't think it's, and nothing against prosecutors, because they're doing a great job. But when a defense attorney wins, there's something sweet, because you know that you've won that with less resources, you've taken every punch the government could give you, and you've still done it. So I think we've all known that feeling of being successful, thinking outside the box, being able to do that. And that's why I'm jumping this, is because I feel like I have the fighting spirit to effectively challenge these corrupt officials, and I know what it takes to be under the gun and under the heat. So I feel like the over decade experience of criminal defense attorney has prepared me to take the heat, and I'm not scared at all.
Well, and I think so much of what is defined as winning in the criminal justice system is a misnomer, particularly these days. I mean, it's not just defined by getting your client acquitted or getting the case dismissed. A lot of times it's defined by being able to reduce your client's sentence or convince the prosecutor that to go to a lesser charge or to not give them that mandatory minimum sentence, to let's find a non-mandatory minimum to charge the client with because, yeah, they made a mistake. They are good for the conduct that you got them on. I think that's the whole misnomer about soft on crime, is that a lot of the people that darken our door and come in our office they're good in a lot of cases for what they did, you know? I mean, and there's just no denying that. And that, a lot of criminal defense lawyers out there may not like to hear another criminal defense lawyer say that, but we all know it's the truth, okay? You know, I do still believe that, as everybody else does, the government has to prove their case. But a lot of times you sit there and you say, they can prove that. They can prove that pretty easily. And so then the goal becomes to humanize that person to the prosecutor, where they're not just a number, where they're not just a case number, where they're not just a file, where they're not just reading the one-sided offense report. It's to present that other side to say, yeah, this person messed up, but this person deserves a second chance, and here's why. Because we all make mistakes. And so, I mean, I think there has to be a kind of a broader definition of what winning is in the system, because I think those are victories. Yeah. I mean, when your client, when they've got your client dead to right, and there's no out, none. You haven't found a bad stop or a bad search, and all the case law for everything else is on your side, and all the facts are just pressing down on you, and you just can't find a way out, but you can find that way to convince that prosecutor to give your client a lesser charge, to reduce that felony to a misdemeanor. Yeah. Or like I said, to not have that mandatory minimum charge. I think that's a win.
That is a win. I mean, humanizing clients is 95% of our job. I mean, only about 5% of our cases even go to trial. So yeah, making it so that you take somebody that otherwise looked like a number and make them a human being, and then having a prosecutor see a person jump off the page, that's a win. I think in many ways our job is very much like a social worker. We're in many ways a mitigation specialist. We're bringing the person
Or as they
out.
say, you know, in selling ice to Eskimos, you know, we have a hard time convincing these people, and you know, convincing a prosecutor in some instances that this person can be redeemed, that this person should be given a second chance, and so, you know, it's a tough job sometimes.
You mentioned that you think you can make a viable argument or claim on wrongdoings of Trump. on Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So or President Trump. So if elected, you're going to try and go after him? You're going to make those? You think you're going to be able to stand up on that?
I would. I mean, as a defense attorney, we don't have very many resources, and we still are able to effectively investigate and prove alternative perpetrators sometimes. I'd have the whole subpoena power of the Congress if you file those articles of impeachment and start that inquiry, and I would just relish that opportunity to be able to find out more. I mean, I think there's already enough, because in my mind, an impeachment's kind of like an indictment where you have probable cause of something, but I don't think impeachment is where Congress should stop. I think they have a duty to forward a foolproof case to the Senate for the trial. So I believe that when you have, I'll just kind of outline the obstruction of justice case. When you have Donald Trump telling James Comey to lay off Michael Flynn, and then you have him inviting Comey into his office and telling everybody else to leave, that's what you'd call intent. He didn't want anybody else hearing what he told Comey, and then saying, you really better lay off Michael Flynn. And then you go the step later when he doesn't lay off Michael Flynn, you fire him. I think you have the whole case of Donald Trump knew what he wanted to do. He wanted to get him to stop prosecuting Michael Flynn. He told James Comey to stop doing that. And then when James Comey didn't stop doing that, he said, you're fired. So I don't really know what more you need for obstruction of justice. I do think a further investigation needs to be done to see the extent of Trump's involvement with the Russia dealings. But I think just on that, you would have enough to impeach him.
Can the president pardon himself?
No, I don't think he can.
I thought with the magic wand, he can just pardon himself and everybody involved.
It's called the Men in Black pen, don't you know?
Oh, that's what it is. That's what it is.
Erase everybody's.
Yeah, that's what it is.
That's what they do to it. Look, I don't know. We've been through this before, at least in my lifetime with Clinton. Other people went through it with Nixon. I don't know that. I think you got to let the special prosecutor's investigation play out. I mean, a lot of people are quick to jump on this bandwagon of impeachment, and we're only in 6 months of this administration, and the reality is it's a wide encompassing investigation. I'm not prepared to say he did or didn't obstruct justice. I'm not really prepared to say one way or another. I think there is a full special counsel team that's going to investigate this. I know a lot of people think that that special counsel team is infected with people from the other side. They want to make it political. I think that special counsel team is infected with people who are just not very good prosecutors. They are some of the same people that were on the Enron task force, which was a complete disaster. And those people, in my opinion, should not be allowed to be on a special counsel investigation, much less any kind of DOJ investigation whatsoever. But so I don't really look at it from a political vacuum. But I think you gotta wait for it to play out. I mean, I think there's we've all been in cases where there's a rush to judgment. There's a rush to judgment by the state. There's a rush to judgment by the police as to what happened here and what happens. As the case goes along, as the months go by, you see a lot more, okay? And so I'm not saying that there is an obstruction of justice. I'm not saying there is. I just think that there is a lot that has gone on here. I mean, look, we just had a Democratic staffer who was trying to flee the country to go to Pakistan, and he smashed up his hard drives. That looks really bad. Okay, it's not looking like the Dems are cleaning this whole thing either. Yeah. Okay, it's looking like there was some fishiness going on the other side too. Yeah. So my personal opinion is that this was the most corrupt election on both sides, and so I think both sides need to be looked at, in my opinion, because I think both sides were the fact that they rigged the primary to get Hillary the nomination over Bernie, the fact that they had to do that, there's something there. The fact that this guy's getting ready to flee the country, the fact that Debbie Wasserman Schultz is yelling at Capitol Police to get her computers back, there's some bad stuff there. That stuff is just as bad, in my opinion, as what's going on in the White House right now. And I think that deserves to be looked at on a bipartisan level too. Yeah.
Corruption is corruption.
Right.
I don't think anybody should be insulated from it. I don't think anybody's loyalty can be so loyal that you would tolerate corruption. And I think that's too much of what's going on. Now, my one issue about the special counsel is that I wish it was an independent counsel. I do fear that Donald Trump, who seems to be willing to use any method that he has available in the law to avoid culpability, that he could just fire Mueller if he doesn't like where Mueller's going. Or the DOJ could deny Mueller the resources that he needs to continue the investigation. I really don't like having the White House and the DOJ like controlling the purse strings and controlling ultimately the special counsel. I really wish Congress...
But isn't Congress going to pass some bill basically that would allow for funding, and basically if the president does try to do something like that, that Congress would then reinstate him? Isn't there
they would need to
some
do that.
proposal right now? I thought there was.
Yeah, there might be.
Or at least there's threats. There's saber rattling as there has been for the last 6 months in this.
I just don't have any faith that a Republican-controlled Congress would end up doing that, and I do think we need that independent commission rule back. So if something like this ever happens again, it needs to be an independent commission. And I think in Congress can also, they could have a parallel investigation. They have a judiciary committee. They have subpoena power. I think that having people that understand criminal justice and federal law would be really helpful for that. I would love to have the opportunity to head that type of investigation and then compare results with Mueller and see what all we found.
What's your next steps for you? We got a couple minutes left. I want to talk about, like where is it going forward here? I mean, the election's not till next year. What's next on your agenda?
Yeah, well, it's a grassroots effort. So right now, we're trying to get as much momentum behind us as possible. I'm trying to meet as many people as possible because it's really important to be able to talk to as many of the voters and find out what their concerns are, meet them. And also, in order to raise money, you need more time. You need to be able to get out there, get the message out, get your positive message of unity out. Go out to the Hill Country, show people that you're not afraid to go to a traditionally Republican area and that you're somebody that has a uniting progressive message that's going to help everybody's lives and try to restore democracy, community, competition, those bedrock American values. So what I really want to do when I go out there to people is convince them that I am the candidate to beat Lamar Smith. And if they are convinced, I say, you know what, go to my website, sign up to support. You can sign up to volunteer. It's chrisperrifortexas.com. That's Perry with an I. And yeah, even if somebody can just give $5, $10, that's something that helps our campaign run. That's the fuel we need because we're not taking corporate PAC money. I mean, after everything I've told y'all tonight, there ain't going to be a corporation that wants to give me any money.
Exactly.
So, but yeah, that's the real message today is that if you want government to come back to the people, people have to start hiring the defense attorney, hiring their representative, just like they hire us to represent them in the courts.
Awesome. Well, best of luck to you.
Thank you, Jimmy.
We appreciate you coming on the program.
Perry versus the machine, man.
Exactly.
Perry versus the machine.
Exactly.
I like it.
We're very glad to have you on. Hopefully you'll come on again.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, JV.
Yeah. Absolutely. JV, you gonna be back next week, or you got some soccer plans?
Oh, no, I'm here.
Okay,
I'm
good.
here.
I want to make
you missed one in 4 years, everybody thinks you're off, I mean, come on.
Just want to be sure. That's all we have for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. For Julio Vela and Chris Perri, I'm Jimmy Ardwan. We'll see you next week. Good night.